Listen up. You're here because you want to know how to play Legend of the Five Rings. You know, that samurai fantasy RPG that has an amazing world. Did you read the book? I'm sure some of you are here because that chore is just too much. Your game master said they were running it, and you want to play but can't be bothered with a massive tome of rules. Others are here because they want to preview the rules to see if they even want to play. And the last of you, well, the last of you have my sympathies. You're the reason I'm making this video. You fellows read the book and noticed that the rules are just difficult to understand. I do not begrudge you. I've been running this game since 2018, and it still throws me for a loop. So for the curious, the lazy, and the befuddled, welcome to the L5R Dojo. Today, we'll be talking about some of the basics. Dice, rings, and skills. These three things are inherently intertwined, so it's difficult to talk about one without discussing the others. Still, we have to start somewhere, and of the three, I think the dice are our best bet. Look at these beauties. I know what you're thinking. What are those strange symbols on each side? Do you think they're neat? Would you rather have numbers? Well, too bad. First, notice that there's two types of dice, a D6 called a ring die and a D12 called a skill die. When you roll these, you roll a number of ring dice equal to your ring and a number of skill dice equal to your skill. There are 4 unique symbols you can find on every die. This first symbol is the most important. This is a straight up Zen circle, the foundational symbol of Zen Buddhism. When this symbol appears on your die, you can keep a success. Successes are the core of the game. When a character wants to accomplish a task, the player needs an amount of successes equal to the target number, or TN. I'll be calling target numbers TNs from here on out. Any number of kept successes less than the TN results in a failure of the task. If the player has a number of kept successes equal to their TN, they will succeed at their task. If they have more successes than their TN, they may gain extra effects. Be aware that sometimes these effects are for each bonus success, or for every 2 or 3 bonus successes. And not every roll will benefit from bonus successes, so be aware of this when it comes time to keep your dice. TNs in L5R tend to be low, with a TN of 1 being easy, a TN of 2 being average, and a TN of 3 being difficult. But they go all the way up. And depending on how a character approaches a task, the TN can change. The next symbol will probably become your best friend. This is the karmic wheel of rebirth, the Dharma of Zen Buddhism. But here in L5R, it's your explosive success. Explosive successes are excellent because when you keep one, not only does it count as a success, but you may roll another die and keep it as well, if you wish. So even if the TN is greater than the number of dice you roll or keep, you always have a chance of succeeding. The only caveat is you have to keep the dice before you roll additional ones. But more on what that means later. Just keep that in mind for now. This guy looks like a little swirling drain, but I like to see it as everything coming together. And that's exactly what happens when you keep this symbol. This is an opportunity. When you keep an opportunity, something extra happens. Exactly what this extra thing is depends on the circumstances of the roll, which can include technique, approach, and action type. What does that all mean? Well, as I said, it's hard to explain dice without explaining rings and skills. Just hold on to that nugget. We'll get there. I promise. But first, it's time for Criticism Corner! Yay! You didn't think I'd go an entire video without complaining about something. I've got to let out my evil side once in a while and show you what's wrong, and this is my first great opportunity. Get it? Because I'm talking about opportunities? Yeah, you get it, you're smart. If you watch my other videos, you know I am not a fan of opportunity, and I'll quickly reiterate why. Every time a player rolls a die, they're going to want to check every chart, every technique they have for the perfect way to spend that opportunity. And with every new book, there's a chance for a new table of new opportunities. So with every die roll, the game could come to a crashing halt as players try to optimize their opportunities. What you gonna do? This mechanic is so core to the rules, you can't easily ignore it. Sometimes, if you're a clever GM, you can streamline it here and there. But, of course, that comes at the expense of players determining the outcomes of their own rolls, which can lead to players feeling robbed of an effect they want. So, either the game slows down and you got a bunch of players waiting on somebody to look through all the books, or you got a player feeling cheated. It's a catch-22. I hate it. I wish it was changed. We'll have to wait for next edition. All right, let's get out of this. Whew. Back to teaching you about L5R. Where was I? Oh yeah, the last symbol. This little W. Actually, it's not a W at all. Instead, it's supposed to be a cherry blossom petal. Do you see it? I mean, I guess? What's weirder is what it symbolizes. Strife. Strife is basically stress. I'll talk about strife in more detail in the next video, but here, just know that while the book says strife isn't inherently bad, the effects of having too much strife are lower die rolls and unmasking, causing losses of honor and glory. All things that are, kind of important. If you keep a die that has a strife symbol, you'll gain a point of strife. Why would you want to keep a die with a strife symbol? Because strife always piggybacks on more useful symbols. I'm sure you've noticed by now I use the word keep and kept over and over again when talking about dice. That's because this game uses a roll and keep system. When you roll your dice, you don't simply add them all up like other games. Instead, you have to pick and choose which dice you think will give you the best chance in the game. This means you might pick more opportunity over successes, or maybe don't take that extra success because you can't afford any more strife. The way you use your dice can be very strategic, giving you short-term and long-term risks and benefits. But how many dice can you keep? Well, that's up to your rings, and there's no better time to talk about rings than right now. So what are rings? Well, they're right there in the title. Look, there they are! Legend of the Five Rings! And there's all these little symbols. They're right there. Legend of the Five Rings gets its name from the Book of the Five Rings by both legendary and historical boy Musashi Miyamoto. I'm sure the Japanese love me calling him a boy. But he's my boy! It's basically a how-to guide on swordsmanship for samurai. Each chapter in the book is named after a classical element with the addition of void as the fifth element. That's right, void. Not heart. Not Bruce Willis. Void. It's everything and nothing, a source of the spirit. So it's more like this. In the game, elements are reimagined as fundamental building blocks of reality, meaning that every character is also composed of these five rings. Instead of your traditional attributes of strength, intelligence, and charisma, you got earth, wind, and fire. But what is earth? Is earth my nose itching? Is that what earth is?
It's when you pick your nose.
Here is where we run into our first tricky thing about this game, where you have to step out of a traditional game and think differently. Rings aren't about how physically strong you are, or how numerically speedy you are, or even what your exact IQ score is. A ring is all about your process. If you study the Japanese language, you'll often see the suffix do on words. For example, kendo, the way of the sword; judo, the gentle way; aikido, the way of being one with ki energy; and bushido, the way of the samurai. Do you see a theme here? The way is a perfect tool to understand what rings are and how to use them. They're a gauge of how comfortable a character is with a certain way of thinking and doing. I'm going to give you an example here. is trying to convince the judge to let him into a street fighting tournament. He starts by deciding exactly how he's going to convince the judge. In L5R, this is called your approach. He sees several ways to approach the situation. First, he could reason with the judge, stating that he's an alum that has been in many street fighting tournaments already. Reasoning is an Earth-style approach, and he would use that ring in his role. Alternatively, he could bribe the judge into letting him in. This form of trickery would be an air approach. Another way would be to charm the judge, perhaps by building a rapport with him over their common love of fighting styles. Charm is a water approach. Ken could also cry foul, stating that his senpai Ryu was allowed in, so it would be unfair to exclude him. This approach attempts to incite an emotional reaction and falls into the fire ring. Lastly, Ken could quote his old master, saying that the fighting spirit begins with a single spark, and that he wishes to prove that he is that spark. To fall back on enlightenment is the essence of void. When used socially, you can see your rings use more of a measure of your personality. Are you more charming or scheming? More analytical or feeling? But rings are not just social. They have a physical side, a practical side, even a magical side. It's all dependent on the skill you're using. So let's get into skills. If you want something that resembles traditional RPGs you've played, you can't go wrong with skills. They are what it says on the tin. You want to hit a guy with your sword? Martial arts melee. You want to play your musical instruments? Performance. But we're not going to get into the nitty-gritty of what each skill does. Instead, we need to take a look at skill groups. Every skill can be put into one of 5 skill groups: artisan, social, scholar, martial, or trade. This chart here basically tells you what goes where. But what we really want to zero in on is this final column way over there. This is the approach. You see here that your rings interact with each skill group differently. For example, if you want to put a torn note back together so you can read it again, you should use composition earth. If you're interacting with a new poison and trying to figure out whether it's deadly or not, you would use medicine fire. I'd like to point out that this list of skills does not have any sort of investigation skill on it. In other games, if you want to gain some sort of information, you can just roll investigation to find a clue. Well, as any Sherlock Holmes fan can tell you, investigation isn't its own skill, but rather the combined knowledge of many different fields. If someone wants to know something about a strange letter, well, they better know something about composition. And if they want to know what kind of weapon would make a specific mark, well, they'd use martial arts melee. Here's another time where you should be asking an important question. If I'm using martial arts melee to investigate, well, the martial skill group's approaches make no sense. What do I do? It's okay. If a skill is used in a different or novel way, you can shift around the skill group approaches until you find one that matches the intended use of the skill. Just keep the rings the same and use the ring for that approach. Some of you can inherently see the advantages and versatility of this system, but for others, this isn't enough. You need to know just how strong your character is. How else would you be able to describe them? Well, here's the beauty. You can describe them however you want. You don't have to rely on a stat to be big or small or pretty or ugly. This is a game where the small guy can beat a big one just by having a better approach. You can outthink and outmaneuver your opponent with your way, your own dough. Now, let's put everything together. Dice, rings, skills. Remember, these dice, these black 6-sided dice, have more strife on them. These white 12-sided dice have less strife on them. When you make a check, you roll a number of ring dice equal to the appropriate ring for your approach, and a number of skill dice equal to your skill. You create your dice pool and roll. You re-roll any dice your special abilities allow, and then keep a number of dice up to the ring you used. But you must keep at least one. Then you roll an extra die for every explosive success you kept. Then you have the option to keep the new die. If that one is an explosive success, you keep it and then it explodes again, and so on until you stop rolling and keeping exploding dice. Next, you tally up all your strife, and you log it on your character sheet. Then You spend your opportunities, and finally, tally up all of your successes together to see if you've accomplished your task. Let's get back to our example of Ken. Ken wants to enter the street fighting tournament. So he decides to talk to the judge. This is his declared intention. Next, he has to determine the details, or more accurately, choose a skill in his approach. The GM states that the proper skill is a courtesy check. As a fiery guy, he decides he's going to berate the judge with how unfair things are until he gets his way. The GM states that this approach is difficult to pull off, so the TN will be 3. What the GM doesn't say is that a more reasoned approach would have been TN1, and all other approaches are TN2. Ken has unknowingly picked the hardest approach. It's now time to assemble his dice. As stated before, for obvious reasons, Ken is pretty fiery, and his firing is a 3. But he hasn't learned much in the way of courtesy and only has a skill of 1. This gives him 3 black dice and 1 white die. He rolls them and gets this result. Next, he is allowed to modify these dice if he has any special ability that allows him to do so. He doesn't. So we're going to move on. Now he must decide which dice to keep. Since his ring is 3, he can keep up to 3 dice. He decides to keep all of his dice except for the one with strife on it. He hasn't made his TN yet, but there's an explosive success which will give him an extra die. And he hopes that will give him the success he needs. Now we'll resolve the dice, starting with the explosive successes. He rolls, and boom! A success paired with a strife. Now he gets to choose if he wants to keep that die or not. While a strife isn't something great to have, he'll take it for now because he really needs that success. Next thing he does is record the added strife on his character sheet. Then we come to the last 2, opportunity and total successes. Look, the book says to resolve opportunity first, but many times spending opportunity is dependent on whether or not your roll was successful. In my experience, you should just use your judgment on which to resolve these first and second. I usually resolve opportunity second in my games, just because it works better for me. Ken's opportunity is used to make the judge cower and stress out. The judge gains 2 strife. Finally, we total up all of Ken's successes and explosive successes. And, hey, they equal the TN of the roll. The judge backs down and lets Ken enter the tournament. Now, I bet this seems like a lot to put together, but in practice, it works much more smoothly. The tournament is full? That's unfair. Ryu gets to fight, so should I. I go to the judge and give him a piece of my mind. Okay, make a courtesy check. I'm pretty heated, so I'm going to use my fire ring. The judge is trained to be cool with hotheads like you, so it's going to be a difficult roll. TN3. Right, I keep 3 of these. And an explosive success. I get to roll another die. Before you roll, just tell me what you're keeping. This success, an opportunity as well. Okay, what's your new die? It's a success with strife. Yes, I'm keeping it. Okay, record your strife. The judge, he's gonna back down a little and let you enter the competition. All right, and just to shove it in his face, I'm using the opportunity to give him 2 strife. He gets a bit anxious around you now. This might help you out during your bouts. And there you have it. It took quite a while, but we made it through the basics of Legend of the Five Rings. We learned how to use rings and skills, what an approach is, and how to read dice. Oh, and the steps of making a check. Next time, we'll talk about derived attributes. Hit the subscribe button and the bell so you'll be notified when it drops. And if you found this video useful, hit the like button. This video is brought to you by my patron squires and knights over at the Order of the Dead Unicorn. There you'll find L5R adventures, NPCs, and new rules, all for free. If you play online or offline, I hope you found this video enjoyable, and I'll see you next time.